Hi, I'm Wade Lawrence, Director and Senior Curator at the Museum at Bethel Woods in Bethel, New York, the site of the 1969 Woodstock Festival. Here in the Museum at Bethel Woods, we tell the story of Woodstock and the entire decade that created it. And we try to connect our visitors with that feeling of what it was like to be a teenager attending the Woodstock Festival and then going home to change the world. 500,000 young people gathered together to hear the best bands of the day. It wasn't necessarily a political statement either. This wasn't an anti-war festival. This was a pro-peace and love festival. Woodstock brought together some of the best musicians of the era. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Who, Jefferson Airplane, the list goes on and on and on. So the music was really crucial to the success of Woodstock. But what also made Woodstock successful was its legacy. The promoters brought in a film crew that documented every bit of the Woodstock Festival. And that documentary won the 1970 Best Picture, Best Documentary Award at the Academy Awards that year. The soundtrack album, a triple album, made the music of Woodstock famous worldwide. And the musicians that played on that album became the soundtrack of our youth. It really was 3 days of peace and music, although it did expand into 4 days. The Woodstock Festival was not the first rock festival. That belongs 2 years earlier in 1967 with the Monterey Pop Festival, the Magic Mountain Fair, and other festivals in the summer of 1967, the Summer of Love. But after those festivals, rock festivals sprouted up all over the country. Most of them, however, were held at racetracks, parks that had band shells, and of course, many of them had trouble with the law. There were gate crashers, trigger-happy policemen who wanted to see that these young people were kept down. Several of the rock festivals that preceded Woodstock ended up in riots. So when Woodstock was announced, and on the lead up to the Woodstock Festival, local law enforcement, in fact law enforcement all over the state of New York and down into New Jersey, were quite worried about what was going to happen in Bethel, New York for that Woodstock Festival. The Woodstock Festival didn't start out as a festival to begin with. Michael Lang and Artie Kornfeld had this idea to build a recording studio in the town of Woodstock, New York. Woodstock, New York had been a bohemian community, an artist community since the beginning of the 20th century. And a lot of musicians lived there. Bob Dylan, Richie Havens, Van Morrison, they were all up in Woodstock. But there was no recording studio. Let's build a recording studio. And you know, we can raise money to offset the cost of it by inviting all those local musicians, and we can have a party, have a concert. Well, they approached their business partners, Joel Rosenman and John Roberts, and pitched the idea of this recording studio. Well, they'd already built a recording studio in Manhattan. They had no interest at all in doing another recording studio. But they did like this idea of the party. Bring all those musicians together. Let's do a rock festival. The four of them decided we'll form Woodstock Ventures to create this musical event in Woodstock. Well, immediately they realized that there were no places in the town of Woodstock that were the right fit for this event. Joel, one of the partners, found this commercial site near Middletown, New York, about an hour south of Woodstock. They made an arrangement with the owner of the property. They started advertising the Woodstock Festival, the Aquarian Exposition, started selling tickets, started building the stage, the fences, all the facilities they needed for a rock festival. And 4 weeks before the festival was to happen, the townspeople in Wallkill, that town there by Middletown, caught wind of the fact that it was going to be a lot of people and it was going to be very noisy. And there's going to be all kinds of problems. It's a rock festival, it's not a folk festival. So they yanked the permits. Woodstock Ventures had 4 weeks, less than 4 weeks, to find another location. Michael Lang had vacationed here, summered here in Bethel as a child. They heard about this farmer by the name of Max Yasgur. Max Yasgur was this little Jewish man who had probably the largest dairy farm operation in Sullivan County. He showed them this piece of land here, which is a natural bowl, and said, you could have your festival here. It's been a rainy season. This is my hay field. I'll charge you, how's that amount? And basically, it was the amount he'd have to pay for hay that year because he couldn't harvest it on this field. He rented the field on the spot, they agreed. The best guesses I've had from researching is it's about $50,000. He didn't become wealthy because of Woodstock. In fact, he lost business. A lot of his neighbors boycotted his product after Woodstock. But Woodstock happened here in Bethel, Sullivan County, New York, because there just wasn't a spot in Woodstock to have it, and they'd already called themselves Woodstock Ventures. Anyone who's listened to the soundtrack album for Woodstock knows that it wasn't just the music, but the stage announcements also made the festival special. Stage announcements were done by at least 3 people: Chipmunk, John Morris, and Wavy Gravy. Of course, Wavy wasn't known by the name Wavy Gravy at the time. He was still Hugh Romney. He was the de facto leader of the hog farm commune who had been brought into the festival to help set up the campground and to set the vibe at Woodstock. In fact, the hog farmers not only set the vibe, they set up a free kitchen to help feed everyone. And they walked through the crowd, and anyone who helped them would get one of their armbands, a red armband with a flying pig on it. They'd put it around their heads, around their arms, and that automatically made them a member of the hog farm too. Some of the more memorable stage announcements: a young woman who was giving birth. It's not clear whether she was giving birth on the festival site or somewhere else, but the entire Woodstock nation heard all at once that a baby was being born. John Sebastian announced on stage when he heard about the birth, man, that kid's gonna be far out. If you pay really close attention to the movie, you'll hear one of the stage announcements in the background. It's only on for a moment, but somebody is supposed to meet somebody else at the Ferris wheel. Well, of course, I've asked many people if they remember a Ferris wheel at Woodstock. No one remembers it, but there is a photograph, an aerial photograph by Barry Levine, and off in the distance, up on the hill behind the audience, about where the museum sits now, you can see a vertical element that sure looks like a Ferris wheel, and we've got a photograph from one of the attendees of one of the vendor booths, and in the background is very clearly a Ferris wheel and a paratrooper ride. One of the bands that didn't show up at Woodstock was Iron Butterfly. They were stuck at LaGuardia Airport. They asked for a helicopter to get them to the festival, and by that time, with all the traffic problems and all the other headaches, the Woodstock promoters just didn't have the inclination or the time to honor their request. The Woodstock promoters sent a telegram to Iron Butterfly's manager. The first letter of each line of that telegram spelled out their response to the request for a helicopter. I'll let you fill in the blanks, but it started with F and ended with U. One of the glaring omissions at the Woodstock Festival was Joni Mitchell. She wasn't even asked to perform at the festival. She had wanted to attend to support her fellow musicians like Crosby, Stills, Nash, John Sebastian, others. But her agent said, no, you can't go to the festival. You're scheduled to be on the Dick Cavett show. It's an important show. We can't afford to have you miss that if you're stuck in traffic or if you can't get out of the festival in time. Joni Mitchell wasn't at Woodstock, but she did get the last laugh. She wrote that famous song, Woodstock, and even though she wasn't at the festival, even though she wrote that song from a hotel room in New York City, watching the festival on television, more than anyone, she captured the spirit of the Woodstock Festival in that song.